crappies or bass or walleyes or places to go. I love when it's a conversation, so please, anywhere along the line, just feel free to ask questions and we'll get rolling on that. So how many people in here are Canadian muskie fishermen? Got a handful of you. Anybody want to go to Canada and fish muskie? Oh, yeah. So I'll give you some. I'll talk a lot about Canadian muskie fishing. Along the way, if you have questions, I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time the last 25 years traveling to a lot of different destinations in Sunset Country. And Sunset Country is that area basically from the Manitoba border where it meets Ontario, basically east to kind of where the North Shore is, and that's the zone. Basically, once you get to Atikokan, is where the muskies are. So we'll chat about that zone, and there's a lot of really cool fisheries up there. And in my opinion, it's the coolest place to fish. Those of you who've been there know exactly what I'm talking about. The scenery is spectacular. The fish are wild. You get to see such cool places. So the more you fish, of course, the more you just. First you want to catch a fish, and then you want to catch more fish, and then you want to catch a bigger fish. That's progression. And if you like fishing alone, you like experiencing wilderness, and this really, to me, offers everything about it. It's such a special place, and the spots are so cool, and the way they're laid out, and the potential for really, really giant fish is there. And there's also patterning. Living in Minnesota, I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up fishing Leech Lake, but a lot of our lakes, it's not. You can kind of put a pattern together. I mean, it might be rocks if you're fishing a big lake like Leech Lake, but a lot of our lakes in Minnesota, it's more spots, right? It's the hump in the middle of the lake is the spot, or it's the west shoreline. That's where the fish are. Well, in Canada, you can say, I want to fish island complexes with big boulders on it that have weeds in the saddle between the two islands. You're like, oh, there's 10 spots like that. There's the dream spots, and it is really, really, really fun. So you get to explore a lot of that. That area, and each lake has its own personality. So where's everybody fished in Canada here?
Pipestone.
Pipestone?
Pipestone lodges.
Yep.
Some we used to up there to the bus. And we fish Lake of the Woods.
Sure, yep. So Pipestone, trout water, clear water fishery, Lake of the Woods, which is obviously
I don't know, the bus is too much. I don't know if there's too many muskies around back in them days.
Yeah, right. So a lot of them got killed back in the day, and they're coming back.
Okay.
So we didn't know as much about them back then. I wasn't fishing in the early 70s. I was still a thought at that time.
I know spring chicken, so.
But so Lake of the Woods is definitely the most famous of all the fisheries, and it's incredibly diverse. Anywhere other spots up there?
Indian chain.
Indian chain, yeah. Fish the Indian chain, yeah. Great action. There's some big fish in there too. There's a ton of lakes up to 105. So
we used to portage across on the island where the crack is over.
Okay, yep.
From one lake to the other.
Yeah. So the Indian chain you just mentioned there, it's so diverse. If you get to Vermilion Bay, it's kind of a hub up there. And if you head north on Highway 105, there's a ton of different lakes. Well, that's not on 105. It's on the road just west of 105. You've got the Indian chain, Canyon. There's Cedar, and Peralt, and there's Cliff and Clay, and there's just all these like little lakes up there. So that's a lot of people think Eagle, they think Black Sewell, they think Lake of the Woods, but there's this just amazing diversity of smaller fisheries out there too that if you're intimidated by big water, they still have the same cool spots. A lot of them have great action, and some of the places like the Indian chain and Canyon, they've got a lot of tiger muskies. They have tiger muskies too, which are really fun and cool to catch up there. And
Is the Indian chain, you gotta watch where you're running up there, or is that fairly?
You do. I think anywhere you're running, Lake of the Woods now has an HD map of the whole lake, and that's definitely the safest one to go to. But Black Sewell, the Indian chain, Cedar, Peralt, Eagle is a map. Wabagoon is really dangerous, but you still got to watch where you're going. But it's relatively safe. There's not much there to, There's as you're going down the south of the Indian chain, there's a dark water lake before you get into those trout water lakes down there. And that one's real shallow, and that one does have a couple sandbars, but there's trees and stuff. You can see it. Have you been, or are you going? Have you been there, or are you trying?
No, we're going for the first time on somebody's recommendation.
Oh, cool. You'll enjoy it. So the Indian chain is cool because there's gin clear lakes in there that have lake trout in them. And then there's like really dirty brown colored water, shallow lakes. And so you you can fish all these different lakes in one system and never have to trailer, so it's pretty neat. And each lake up there really does have its own personality. They're all unique and different. Lake of the Woods is a good example of how you can have gin clear lake trout water. You've got 150, 200 feet of water. You can see really far down, super low density, very big fish. You can head over to the west side of Lake of the Woods and towards the northwest angle north, and you run into some darker water, really high density muskie, muskie populations over there. And really everything in between is what you can find. And then Eagle is another great example. The big lakes are almost all very diverse. You can fish different styles. Things happen at different times on these fisheries. So Eagle happens to be one of my favorites just because that was the first Canadian trip I ever went on, was to Eagle Lake, and I fell in love with it. It was a pretty special place. But same thing on Eagle, the West Arm. Really deep, clear trout water. You get into the center part of the lake and it's just a walleye factory. It's kind of that light green, brown water, 40 to 60 foot basins, full of life, just completely full of life. And then as you head down to the southeast side, it gets really brown. Then you go to Wabigoon, which is a extremely overlooked fishery. Back in the 80s, a lot of really big fish came out of Wabigoon, and they kind of went through its heyday in its past. But Wabigoon is absolutely an amazing place. It's very scary, and it's very different. The water clarity in Wabigoon is probably about like this. It'd be like the Red River of the North. It's really different than anything most muskie fishermen think of, and the fish are almost always in about this much water. They're really shallow. And so it's fun. The fish go crazy because you're hooking them in really shallow water, and it's cool. And then you get to Lac Seul, and Lac Seul is a big sand pit to the far north, and Lac Seul probably has some of the biggest muskies on planet Earth. It's hard to access. You can kind of access on the south side of Deception Bay. Most of the muskies in Lac Seul are on the east side, so there aren't really places to stay on Lac Seul. There are very few. Chamberlain Narrows in the north, and Anderson's has a couple outpost camps. A houseboat trip is a thing you can do up there, but they're all unique and different. It's fun to I guess what I'm getting at, it's fun to experience all of them because they offer different things. Or whatever trip that you want to have, if you want action, if you want a big fish, there's opportunities for all of those up there. So I want to tell a quick story about, we're talking about some of these places and people might be planning trips, and like I mentioned, I've been fishing Eagle for a long time, and I go back and you get in this pattern of I know where fish are, so I want to keep going back to those spots, and you get really comfortable with it, you get confidence in it, you know how to run it. And you can of course be very successful in those situations, but also going to new places, you can still have great success because you don't know anything about it, right? I'll share an example with you that we were on Lac Seul, a houseboat trip. There was 5 of us went on this trip a number of years ago, and we were fishing a section of Lac Seul I'd never been to before. And I've got a buddy who guides up there, and of course we hit it like we always do. It's just that first major cold front in September. It's sleeting, it's snowing, it's just miserable. The fish are, it's turning over, so it's a really hard time of year to fish. And so Ben was out, he was out guiding. And so just to kind of share some perspective on how you approach a lake. So Ben's out guiding. He knows it's tough conditions. He's got to put people on fish, right? That's his job. So what does Ben do in these tough conditions? He goes to his A spot. Boom, boom, boom. He just fishes all of his best stuff. And you know what's happening? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He's not catching any fish. Now, Ben would outfish me 99 times out of 100 on Lac Seul, but we didn't know anything about this. So all we did was we drove around with our depth finders and looked for life. Where's the walleyes? Where's the food? What's happening here? What's happening there? We ended up landing on fish, and I'm not saying we were better fishermen than Ben, but we just followed what life was doing. We looked at what was happening in the fishery, and we started fishing areas where we saw life, we saw fish, and we didn't know this spot was better than that spot or whatever happened. So if you just pay attention to what's happening in the environment, you can often capitalize on some really, really good opportunities, and you're not stuck in those ruts of, this is the spot, I got my big one on, and I always catch them here, but if they're not there, you can't catch them, right? So don't be intimidated. My point is, don't be intimidated on going to check out new water, because if you just approach it with the idea that I want to just see what's happening, read your depth finder, trust your electronics. And what was so cool about that trip is where we parked the houseboat. We pulled in and we actually started the trip walleye fishing. We went just looking for a walleye hunt. and it was littered with bait. There was so many ciscos in that area, it was crazy. And all the humps, just hook, 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 hook. Black Susan said, world-class walleye fishermen. We ran into a couple muskies. I think we caught 3 that first day in that area. He's like, wow, this is really, really cool. We're on it. Well, the day ends. We go out the next morning. We're like, well, we got to get fish for lunch or for dinner tonight. Nothing. There are absolutely no fish on any of the humps. There's no bait. There's nothing. And about 4 miles down the lake, boom, we ran into the same thing. These fish were moving through the system. They were moving about 3 to 4 miles a day. And we ended up staying, that's how we ended up catching fish. We just stuck with where those ciscos, it was all about the ciscos, where they were moving throughout the system. And it was, really eye-opening on how important it is to be in tune with what the bait is doing, what the walleyes are doing. So muskie fishing, it's just really easy to think muskies, muskies, muskies. What are the muskies? Well, you really want to you want to see what the walleye guys are doing. How deep are the walleyes? Where are you seeing most of the walleyes? Where's the bait at? Those are all the things that really can put you on top of fish. So they really do move. I mean, the fish can travel miles and miles in a short period of time. It's always been interesting to me if we've looked at telemetry stuff and even having heard stories of people catching a fish in this spot, and all of a sudden it seems like a couple days later they caught a fish that seemed to be an eternity away. But just think if you're a fish and you're swimming around at a speed about like this, and that's all you're doing for 10 hours, 12 hours a day. You're going to be 15 miles away from where you started, right? They're not like bolting. If they're just on a slow stroll over that period of time, they can cover tremendous amounts of water. So as soon as you see life disappear in areas, and these Canadian systems are very vast, they're dynamic, and certain basins can light up with life, and other times they can be dead. So if you're fishing an area and it was good but nothing's there, don't be afraid to just go to an area of those fisheries that's completely different than what you're at. If you're fishing an area that's got depths in, say, that 25 feet or less, and that's hot, and then it cools off, maybe go look at the 25 to 40 stuff. So basins are a really big concept to understand. What I mean, these are, how deep is the water around you? Because so much of the Canadian fisheries revolve around what ciscos are doing. And they're always, of course, looking for bug hatches. That's the biggest thing. They're eating a lot of bugs. So you'll see certain areas of a lake pop up. So this is Eagle Lake right here, one of my favorite places. And I was talking about how expansive Eagle is. This is all really shallow, treacherous water. And this is part of what makes Eagle Lake such an amazing fishery, is this is where the production happens for the lake. Millions and millions of walleyes get hatched down here. Tons of muskies get hatched down here. Then as you start to make your way out, you get into this really deep water basin. So you've got a big movement of fish that will come in through here, and this is fire opener into maybe the second week of July, and then it can often start to slow down. And if you were fishing up here that second week of July, you might have had your first day, might have been back in here, and you just started creaming fish in here, and all of a sudden they're gone. Well, a lot of times the next thing you know, they're boom, 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 boom. Those fish can move so quickly, and they'll show up in different areas of basins. I've really been talking fast, I feel like. Does anybody have questions about this stuff? No? Is it okay? Everybody, do you get what I'm understanding? And you're understanding the concept of it? So, yeah, this is a really big deal to understand. I can't emphasize this enough. Is to look at, even though it's one lake, look at it like multiple lakes, and that's based on the depth of water in that particular area. Don't be afraid to move when things change. And this can also be true. I was talking about that summer transition, going from early summer into that kind of steady period into July and August. The same thing happens in the fall when the lakes turn over. So you get on a trip and you're like, oh man, and up there it's generally like, third week of September is very, very traditionally around turnover, meaning the lakes flip, the water starts to get into the mid to high 50s, and things just get different. You'll go to an area, and it is like, I'm telling you, I've got awesome electronics in my boat, and you cannot see a fish. You're like, there's absolutely nothing here. It's just the Dead Sea. And then all of a sudden you buzz into, this might be the 60-footer. A lot of times in the fall, everybody's thinking deep water, main lake stuff. That's a lot of times where I start bopping into all this stuff, the same stuff I was fishing in early summer. Shallower areas, weeds, things that are a little bit more stable in. big deep water, it's turning over, it's not as stable as a lot of that shallower water stuff can be. So don't be afraid to go back to some of those shallows later in the fall as well.
You're a fish eagle in the opener?
I go there not on the opener, but I go the week after the opener every year. Yep.
First time we went up there that early. That was great in the July and August, but
They're
I
not
was just curious as far as that turnover, is eagle any specialty to other lakes in Canada? Traditional warmer water, find the shallow, the areas next to the spine, big.
Yeah, so Eagle, it's my favorite trip of the year to go to Eagle is that third week of June. I just love it. It's just, so the fish are shallow and they're active. So this is kind of one of the things I was talking about. This area in here, this is where I end up spending a bunch of my time that third week of June. This is all really good shallow habitat. I spend time down in here, back in here, in these areas, and it's, what I love about it is you can put on a tiny little bucktail, cast it out in the nice cabbage beds, reel it in fast, and bang. Bang, you know, they're hot, they're active, they jump, they follow. It's a really, really fun time of year before the rock bite really gets going, and it's pretty consistent out there. Yep. So if you're looking at a trip, I would say it's worth doing. And Eagle Lake has a lot of weeds. I'll talk about weeds here in a little bit, but like Lake of the Woods, if anybody's fished Lake of the Woods for a long time, you know that what were once beautiful cabbage beds, areas that had a lot of weeds, the rusty crayfish are in there, and a lot of those weed beds are gone now. It's really hard to find good traditional cabbage beds on Lake of the Woods. When you do find weeds, they're really good, but Eagle, Axel, a few of those places still have those great weed beds. So I'm going to chat about, this next bit is about current. I'll move on to weeds next, but current happens to be one of those things that all of these big Canadian lakes, first of all, they're reservoirs. We call them big lakes, but all of them have a hydro dam on it, and they generate power, and there's current moving through those systems. It can be from flow going through it, but more often than not, it's wind current. Wind is driving a lot of current. Even on some of the smaller lakes, there's wind current, but Lake of the Woods, Eagle, Laxpool, Wabigoon, most of it is wind-driven current. And if you're having a tough trip, there's almost no better bet than to go find areas of the lake that neck down and have moving water. Those are definitely the most consistent spots that you can find. If you're struggling to find things that are happening, always look for those current areas. And so always pay attention to what the wind has done previously. So if you've had a strong wind from the west, of course it's going to pile water up on one side of the lake. When that wind dies, that water is going to make its way back across. Right? The lake is going to settle. You can't believe how much water can actually move. But a good example was I was on a trip a few years ago, and it was in early July. We were up there. It was hot. It was in the 80s. The surface temperature just got to about 70, 72 degrees. And we had this huge wind event, one of those just hot, early summer days where the wind was gusting to like 40, but it was like sustained at 30. And I'd been fishing the west side it was kind of the west side of the lake is where I had a lot of action. And so I fished in the morning, we had some good luck, and later in the evening I came back in there, and the water temperature was like 63 degrees. So it's an 80-some degree day, right? It's super windy, and the water was 72, and now it's 63. The water got pushed across the lake, so that warmer water pushes the colder water down, and the colder water, that's how those lakes move. The colder water comes in. And so just like that, the areas that were just awesome, they had a 10-degree drop in water temperature, even though it was hot out. It just goes to show you how dynamic they are and how that water can move. And you really got to start to follow the hot water. Then you just abandon that area. Your thermometer could be one of the best tools that you have in the boat to say, okay, this is obviously dead. Don't fish like a 10-degree change overnight. The fish probably didn't all move away from that area, but they shut right down. They waited for things to warm back up and stabilize out. So always pay attention to those types of wind events. Somebody here's got to have some good current spots up there, don't you?
You think they move the fish? They just drop down, go into bays, look for the warmer water? I mean, do they move that much in those winding events?
I really don't think so, just because I've had, it can be calm the next day and all of a sudden it seems like the water's back to normal. within 18 hours, and there's fish there again. So I don't know, but my prediction would be that they deal with it for a day or two, and then they turn back on. So, but they can move, but that's a long distance for them to travel.
I had that last year, 80 degrees, and it dropped with the wind all of a sudden down to 68. You're like, thank you, first of all.
Yeah.
So it's like, boy, they're all over the place. It seemed like they were there, but just different elevator, different levels of water.
Yeah, it really does. It changes. Wind can just play such a huge role in how things happen. And speaking of wind too, one of the things we like to do with muskie fishing is there's a nice wind-blown point, right? Or the wind's blown into a weed bay or the front face of an island. And a lot of times you just fish that front face of the island where the wind is crashing in. And many times that's where you got to put your money on it, many times that's where the active fish will be, is on that windward side. But especially on cold fronts, sunny days where it's cold and you've got like a big northwester or something like that that's moved through, a lot of times the back sides of those points where you've got that calm, the lee side, the slick water, spend time fishing those. That's the other thing, is that you fish 3 great points, great bays, or whatever it is that's exposed to wind and you're not seeing anything, duck into the lee side. You don't always have to be in the wind. Muskies will really spend a lot of time, especially if you get a big cold front and it's sunny. Those things will tuck up in really shallow water on the lee side of an island or a little pocket like that. They love being in those spots. It could just be a little sand bay. I mean, there could be rocks or weeds or whatever, but they'll sit just in little sand spots. Yes, sir.
Would a muskie face the current or with the current?
So yeah, yes, if the muskie would face in they always have their nose into the current. They're in a river. They're always been. It's the same thing with the wind. And so one thing we don't really understand is you might see the way the water's moving on the surface, but what's happening 5-10 feet down, you can't always be quite so sure. But if there is indeed current moving into it, they're always going to be they'll turn and swim to other spots, but if they're resting, they're going to have their nose into the current. I do a lot of river fishing too now with side imaging technology. I mean, when you're going up current, it just paints perfect pictures of muskies all the time. It's the truth that is indeed, what the fish are doing.
You ever fish around Sportsman's Lodge instead of mostly the east side?
Fourth of July around Eagle.
Around Sportsman's Lodge?
Uh,
Where you guys fish on the east side there?
So Sportsman's is on, I'm just trying to think. Sportsman's is up by, that's up, or the West Arm, more so towards the West Arm, yep. I haven't been up in that neck of the woods since I was a kid, so, but once you get in more towards Vermilion Bay, I mean, the habitat gets a lot, the density goes way up, and Eagle right now is just, like, when I started fishing Eagle Lake, granted I didn't know what I was doing, but the whole idea, Steve Herbeck, he's kind of one of my muskie heroes, he's a guru on muskie fishing, but he would just always tell his customers, when you're coming here, you just hope you want a bite this week. That's what you're coming here for, is you're going for a bite. Eagle is known for catching a huge fish, very low density, but really giant fish. Eagle now has turned into one of those fisheries where it still has the magnum top. I mean, there are really big fish in that lake, but it also has really good numbers. I mean, you got multiple fish days very consistently out there now, which never happened before. But that Vermilion Bay area is good, and then if you go like that, I don't know if you'll travel that far, but down in through the back channel in the Smith Bay in that area in the 4th of July time frame, that's a really good zone to be in then. And then who was I talking? What's that? There's that little lake in the back channel somebody snuck into, Blind Lake. I've heard a few stories about some real big ones coming out of Blind Lake at that time of year too. That's where all the walleyes run into that. So, but Iowa Bay is another good spot if you want to keep going west into the trout water. That Iowa Bay is on the north side there. That's a good spot to fish in. Earlier in the season too, I lost a real big one that still haunts me in the mouth of that years ago. So, anything else? Or should we keep moving on?
That's a female. That's a female there, right? The 4-H. How many actually young ones do they have that survive?
I don't really know, and I think it's I don't know if anybody really knows. I forget what a big female muskie can produce in terms of egg production, but What's kind of interesting is that the natural fisheries like Leech Lake here in Minnesota, and a lot of the Canadian fisheries, they really seem to have, all size classes of fish throughout. And a lot of our stock fisheries here in Minnesota, as many of you know, blacks, bemidji, it's like we've got huge fish, but what happened to all the 36 to 45 inch fish? There seem to be not very many, but it seems like it's really hard to get fish to come through. So kind of one of my, I don't know if it's true or not, but I would suspect that a lot of the natural fisheries probably, just like crappies or walleyes or whatever, every 3 or 4 years they get a really good hatch. Fish do really well, and you get a big push of fish through the system. And the way we do it, it's just an every other year, or in some cases every year deal. And it's likely that, my thought is, it's likely that those just aren't taking as much. So I'd be real curious to see if we were to pulse, try to mimic what nature would typically do, more fish in longer intervals, it might have a better impact. But I have no idea. I'm just talking. So it seems like, I'm not quite sure. So, all right. So I was talking about weeds, and this sounds stupid, but it's true. Weeds are really good places to go fishing. Like, fish like weeds. I mean, it really is that simple. And if you fish shield water, you know that is where you spend a lot of your time fishing main lake rock points, fishing rocky reefs, those types of areas. But I kind of fell into this trap or this idea when I was a younger muskie fisherman that big muskies need to be close to deep water, they need to be close to big water, and most of the time you're going to find them near the biggest basins, the deepest water, and the most predominant structure. They do that, but big muskies will go really shallow, and big muskies love to be in the weed beds, and it doesn't matter if it's opening weekend or last year I was up on Eagle in the middle of October. And we started out fishing rocks, which you typically think would be the deal, and it was a later season up there, so it was the big blades, you're moving fish on rocks, and I thought I just got to go check out what's happening in the weeds, and it was amazing. I was just floored. There were way more fish, and there were huge fish in 3-4 feet of water in the middle of October in the weeds, and the weeds were still good. So a lot of people, I talk about this ice fishing, I don't care if it's largemouth, I don't care if it's crappies, I don't care if it's muskies. People are always saying, if you're not, you got to find green weeds. Green weeds are the ticket to catching fish, right? That's great if you can find green weeds, but this can be, if you can find vertical standing cover that's vertical. It doesn't matter if they're alive or dead, if it's vertical cover, fish love it. Everything loves it. Minnows, everything uses it. So if you get into some of these areas in Canada that have that standing cover, they are just amazing places to fish all year long, and most people give up on them like in the middle of August. The reef bites start happening, the fish start showing up on the main lake stuff, and they abandon the weeds. The weeds are done. I'm telling you, you get cold fronts, you get warm sunny days, you have tough conditions. Big muskies love weed beds, they like to be close to them, and definitely spend more time looking at these things. It's a really big deal. So, and there's different types of weeds up there too. So cabbage is of course the most popular, the big broadleaf plant. Let's move forward. And this is a picture of cabbage right here. Everybody's familiar with that. But then you see a lot of coontail up there as well, and then there's deer tongue. It's like almost lily pad looking plants. You just see a little leaf on the top. I've had great success in all of them. Cabbage seems to be the most temperature sensitive. When you get some of those the first freezes in early September up there, the cabbage seems like it starts to brown up. It starts to just break off real easy, and you start to lose a lot of cabbage. The coontail, it tends to hang on a lot longer. It's a lot denser. It stays in the system a lot more, and then the deer tongue. So the coontail tends to grow in a lot of cases a little bit deeper, especially where we are here. The cabbage almost always seems to be growing in that 10 to 12 foot range, and then that deer tongue seems to be the next step in. And I've got some big listed on Lac Soda. I've got some really big muskies in that deer tongue that look like little lily pads. So the cabbage is gone when you're traditionally used to fishing. So if the fish want to be in the weeds, they've got an option for deer tongue, which is just loosely scattered vertical cover, and then you've got the coontail, which is a really dense mat. And a lot of times those fish, even late in the year, will scoot right up into the deer tongue, and they'll be really shallow, even in September and October. It's a really, really, really hot pattern. So finding weeds in Canada is really a fun deal to do too. So how to find weed beds up there, it's actually quite simple. And once you get the hang of it, you can pretty much be driving across the lake and say there's going to be a sweet weed bed there, there's going to be one there, there'll be one over there. So the first thing I do is with the electronics, I use the Humminbirds, but there's a feature called depth highlight and shallow water highlight. So I'll set my shallow water highlight when I'm riding in Canada, almost always I set it to like 6 or 8 feet, something like that. So I'm just, for safety and navigation, I don't want to be going near those areas and I'll total the boat, but then I'll know how deep the cabbage is. I usually set that at 8 to 12 feet in these spots. Eagle isn't high depth, these spots jump out. So I'm like, okay, these are likely looking areas. Clearly this is the back of a bay. There should be some stuff in here. Obviously there could be weeds growing in any of these depths in here, and all this looks good. So I'll look at those zones first, and then I look at the shoreline. If you see sand, a sand beach up there, you can almost guarantee, Legal Woods used to have this, but you can almost guarantee that in front of that sand beach there will be a nice cabbage bed. It's almost 100% of the time in the lakes they don't have rusty crayfish, so okay, cool. And it's really great if you see a sand beach in the middle of a big lake, something, you know, like in front of the ocean, you find a big weed bed in there, you're like, oh, this is going to have some really big fish on it at some point. Yep.
Curious how you approach those weed beds, and there are good ones in Eagle that are football field size.
Yeah.
How do you approach those things?
So yeah, he asked how do you approach like a really huge weed bed, and typically what I do is I drive over them first. So I spend a ton of time, like in the middle of the day when fishing is tough, I just put the boat in gear, I start driving around, I'll side image, and I'll look for the densest stuff, and then I'll also, I run a tiller boat, but I just stand up and I'm looking for the really dense pockets of it, and then I put waypoints on them. A lot of times what you see of these fields seem really big, but you'll often find that, okay, this is, you know, this 200-yard stretch here, there's a couple plants here, a few there, but then all of a sudden you realize that, oh, there's a wall of cabbage that runs at this angle or runs at this angle, and you start to put that stuff together. So just, whatever, blow the spot. The fish are just going to lay down. They're not going to evacuate it. I drive over it, look around, get a good lay of how it looks, and you end up running into a bunch of fish, and there's just waypoints I have in those things, like every year. They're in this little 50-yard section, like El Dorado Bay. It's just one of those things that's got tons of cabbage, but there's like, all of a sudden you look at it, there's a line in this bay that's where they live. But it takes you time going over it and zigzagging it to really see it and understand it. And then they can also, of course, show up at a random location. So that's kind of how I go about approaching these. So yeah, I kind of chatted through that. So here, anybody who's using side imaging technology, it's kind of hard to see. So you can see that this is a plant, the cabbage we were talking about. And if you want to, if you're fishing dirty water, you can't see them with your eyes, it's windy or whatever. This is what the signature of this plant looks like. See that? Those are all cabbage plants right there, those little white spots. This is a lot of just that nasty, just sandgrass, and just kind of crumbly little weeds, and then this is what it looks like. So if you have side imaging in your boat, look at what, when you're driving through stuff, that technology is so powerful, you can actually identify the type of plant that it is. And so now all of a sudden, instead of me having to just hope, I've got my polarized glasses, looking, maybe seeing the right plant on my 2D sonar, I can go around at like 6-7 miles an hour, cruising pretty fast, and go boom, 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 boom. They almost look like fish. It almost looks like there's a school of crappies or perch or something like that on side imaging. But you get that return and you drop a waypoint on it, and boom, there you go. So
When you drop your weight and stuff like that one was pretty small. Are you then going up and staying out at that 20, 30, casting into it or beyond it and dragging baits across it, or how do you attack those little areas of cabbage?
So he asked if you mark a spot like that, you put a waypoint on it, how do you approach it? So I do. I guess it would depend on maybe not something like that. It's just an example. But yeah, if I've got it, so what I'll do is I lay waypoints on all of it. So I cursor over with my screen. I put a waypoint right on I always put it on the edge closest to the outside, typically, so then I know where I've got to be, and then when you come back in there, you can adjust your distance to cast it. So try to keep yourself like a boat length or two off of it, so you can obviously get in there, and depending on the presentation, get it down to depth and work through it. But yes, absolutely put those weight. I've got 6,000 waypoints between. I just boom, 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 boom. I put them in all the time, and they're cheap, and it's worth having lots of waypoints on there. Any other questions so far? Let's talk about baits. Everybody likes talking about baits fishing. What's your favorite bait to throw? Top water. What's some other baits?
Bucktail.
Bucktail.
Yeah.
Yep. You know what my favorite one is? The one that they're biting. So you really need a bunch of tools. Lures are just tools. Topwater and bucktail, that doesn't matter where you are, two of the most productive tools that you've got in your boat. So know that presentations can change, of course, seasonally, but they can also change daily. They can change by the minute. I mean, anybody who spent any time in the water knows the sun hits the trees and things can be way different than they were in the middle of the day. Fish's attitudes change, and you have to adjust with it. So we're talking about early season. A couple of my favorite baits, and the trend has been, of course, big, and I do like throwing big baits, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's really nice to not have to throw double cowgirls and huge 13s and all of that heavy stuff. And early summer, into July, I catch a ton of fish on little baits like this. This is what I've got on pretty much all the time. I'm throwing just something little like this. And the reason I like it is I can make a ton of casts with it. I can cast it out really quick, just boom, 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 boom. But we were talking about weed beds earlier, kind of digressing here, but this is the mistake I see a lot of people make. You get into a nice big weed bed, just because you're a musky fisherman, you just send it way out there across the weed bed. It takes you a minute and a half to get the thing back in. When I'm fishing these baits, I'm rarely throwing further than here to the wall. It's just boom, there's a lane there, reel it in, boom, boom. So you're better off to make your casts more precise and closer together. If you think about drifting through a weed bed and you make a long bottom cast, there could have been 5 or 6 great targets that you just drifted by when you're waiting for this cast. You don't even know where it is, but a lot of times with your electronics now, you can see where the targets are to cast to. So fishing in heavy cover, you're far better off to make shorter casts and make more of them. And still to this day, muskies will bite little tiny bucktails like this. They love eating these things, reeling them in fast, just over the tops of the weeds, at the tops of the rocks. This is obviously one of the big deals. And then as summer progresses, really the thing with, this is muskies anywhere, typically start small. Of course, sometimes they always like big stuff, sometimes they really like small stuff. And then we move into the bigger stuff later in the year. So I couldn't believe how many. So I was fishing with Luke Ronnestrand a few years ago, and he's just a musky guru. The guy's just dialed on stuff. And Luke was telling me how much he was fishing bucktails into the fall, and I kind of would hang my bucktail stuff up, around, once the water got into the 50s, I started spending a lot more time on rubber, jerk baits, crankbaits, that type of thing. But I've started fishing these big blades a lot more into October, even into November. When the water's in the 40s, just slow rolling these big blades. It's absolutely a killer. This was in October last year in Canada, the big, 10, 12 combos. This was definitely the best bait that we had late into the fall last year, which seems you just don't think about October bucktail fishing. But don't write spinners off. You can never, ever, ever, when you're muskie fishing, write off an inline spinner because it's the most productive muskie lure of all time, period. So we mentioned topwater, that's another great bait, but this is another bait that, I don't know how many people in here know what this is. Oh yeah, suet. This is the original suet thriller. This is I love it. Yeah, perfect. This is an amazing tool. This catches so many fish. Next to a bucktail, this is for me. This is my second favorite lure of all time, just because I've caught so many fish with it, and it's versatile. So this happens to be a non-weighted suet. It's a 10-inch. It's not weighted, and the reason I like this bait, you get some that you just fall in love with, but we were talking about weed beds earlier. You get into sloppy weeds in Canada, and believe it or not, this can be one of the most snag-free weedless baits that's in your tackle box. seems crazy. You look at this bait and you say, how can that be? It's got 3 sets of treble hooks on it. I can't pull this thing through a dense weed bed. You can. So what this bait does, the reason it's not weighted, this thing is crazy buoyant. And so what you do is you pop the bait down, pop it down, and if you make contact with cover, you give it slack, it backs out. So you can take this bait and you can literally go hunting in those pockets. I was talking about making short casts. There's a little hole in the weeds. Boom, boom. Pop it down, boom, boom. And the other thing this bait can do is it can get hung up on cover but not get snagged. And this is a really big deal. So think if you're a muskie that's in a really thick weed bed, and you know something's there, but you don't know exactly where it is, you want to bite. It's pretty easy for a bucktail to go by and you've got a wall of cabbage there, and you would have bitten it, but you can't. You can feel it, you can't see it, right? So you take this suic, and if I get it hung on a piece of cabbage in the weed bed, I just sit, I basically try to hold the suic into the cabbage and just shake it, tap, 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 tap. So it's moving the plant, right? The whole plant is moving. Okay, all right, something's over here. I can start tracking this thing down. I'll back it off, and it stays on there. Then it's a little bit of slack in the line, and a quick rod snap down. Boom! It breaks free. It's clear. Pop it. Boom! I can't tell you how many muskies I've caught with it. So getting caught up on cover is a really, really big deal, and it doesn't work with a bucktail. It doesn't work with a lot of baits, but the suic is one of those baits that has a very specific purpose for fishing weeds like that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, wood or plastic, and you screw around with tuning yours very much.
Okay, so he asked about the suic. This particular one, I fished all different kinds of suic. The one I'm talking about for doing this application it's a wood bait. So it's one of their original wood baits, and you have to tune it quite often. So if you get a fish on it, it ends up in the net. You've always got to sit and play with the tail. So every suic is a little bit different. You might have to tilt it this way, tilt it that way, bend it up, bend it down until you get that hunting action. But generally speaking, you can get most of them to hunt, where they'll go down, over. If it's just going straight, and that works. But if you get it tuned right, the bait should hunt this way, back up, hunt this way, back up, hunt this way, back up, and it should just start pecking your way through it. And you can fish this bait deep too. So it's all depending on how you manage your line. So if you're just doing big sweeps, that doesn't work in the weed bed. When you're fishing the weeds, you get tight on the bait, you're basically going to pull it. There's very little time to actually have slack in the bait. You're not sweeping it, giving it line to come back, sweeping. You're basically always working the reel, and you're making the bait hunt and dive down until you hit cover. When you hit cover, then you can back it out, give it slack. If I'm fishing the same bait in open water, I'll do a lot more of the big sweeps, let it pause, big sweeps, let it pause, and those longer sweeps then we'll get the bait a little bit more depth. So it is quite versatile, and I do like fishing with the weighted ones, the high impacts, and some of those other ones later in the year if I'm fishing deeper water. But this is a forgotten bait, an amazing tool. That original 10-inch floater, the 9-inch works too, but the 10 is so much more buoyant, and that's the whole secret to this bait, is getting it to back up and float out.
Do you use a fluorocarbon leader with that then?
So the question was, what kind of leader use with that? So no, I run a single strand wire. I run a 124 pound single strand wire. No, 174 works good too. Just like the American fishing wire, just the cheap, whatever, round, it's a single strand wire. If you got around those pliers, leaders are easy to make. And then no swivel on it. You don't want a swivel on it. So it's just that, yep, to a snap or to a split ring, and away you go, or a welded ring, whatever. So yep, no, I find the fluorocarbon just tends to dampen it a little bit. You get a lot more life out of it with just a single strand.
Longer leaders or shorter leaders?
So I run about probably a leader that's maybe, I don't know, 8 inches long, something like that. Yep, I run pretty short leaders on almost everything. So the shorter the leader, the more you can do with the bait by the boat. So if you're stuck with a long leader, it makes it really hard to do anything near the boat. Shorter leaders allow you a little more room to move around. And I was fishing with a buddy of mine, Brian Miller. He spent a lot of time fishing with Dick Peterson and Jack Burns back in the day, and he had muskie fish for a while, but this was back in when fluorocarbon had just taken everything by storm, and he had just this little 5-inch piece of wire, like that's what he was using for all of his stuff. And I was like, holy cow, Ryan hasn't gotten up the times here, man. He's still fishing in the 80s. And he's like, oh yeah, I started to see how the baits behave differently. Well, I fished with that back in the day, but then fell into this and was like, oh man, leaders are just like line. There's a, in terms of leaders, at bucktails, I'm almost always running a single strand wire leader, 124 pound. Jerk baits are around 124 pound single strand wire or 174. And then about the only time I'm using fluorocarbon is for big rubber baits or baits that would tend to foul a lot. So where it's just going to bend them and it's going to bend the wire. But I use single strand wire for just about everything. I just think it makes the baits perform a lot better.
And you don't hook the baits on the leader when you're fishing with leaders this long.
What's that?
When you're casting, you don't hook baits on the leader when the leader is this long.
Oh, sure.
You have a lot more chance of hooking the leader.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. That's right. So, top water, of course, is one of those things that you can't. It's the same thing. Top water keeps continuing later and later into the year, and in big wind situations, you can't be afraid to throw top water. We were on a trip to Lac Sewell a number of years ago, and we had not seen a fish the whole trip on top water. Right? It had been coming. It just seemed like it was perfect, but gosh, you kept throwing it, nothing. We were catching fish, catfishing, bucktails, suets, whatever. And of course, what did the big fish of the trip get caught on? Top water. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things that didn't produce a lot of fish, but it produced a big fish. And I was talking to a buddy of mine, he was over last night, we were talking muskie fishing, and when I first started doing it, I just reserved top water for sunrise, nice overcast day where it was slick and calm and sunset. I'm telling you, the first experience I had was with Chad Kane on Leech Lake, and we were fishing in wind where you could hardly stay, it was just hard to even stand in the boat, really big wind. And he busts out a pacemaker, which is a prop bait that makes a little clicking sound. And he starts throwing that on the west bar. It was like the waves were big enough that it was almost like you could see the muskie. Right, we were down in a swell and the muskie was following the top water through there. And it just opened my eyes to think about how loud a top water is. It's got a clack to it. Clack, clack, clack. It's way louder than a bucktail. It's way louder than a crankbait. I mean, the thing is making a ton of noise. If they're shallow, they're super keen. They know it's there. So don't be afraid. Don't feel limited to fishing top water in calm conditions. Anytime they can end up falling victim to it. So, and then spinnerbait. We were talking about making contact with cover earlier and how important that really can be. The spinnerbait is one of those tools. It's just I feel like how many people in here still throw spinnerbaits? Got a few? Well, it's great. I love to see that. Spinnerbaits are a tool that's overlooked. First of all, you can do a lot of things. It's not limited to any particular depth. You can fish a spinnerbait. I catch big pike jigging spinnerbaits in 25 feet of water. You can catch them you can catch muskies in shallow cover with it. You can catch them just in open water, casting and reeling. And they really have a lot of versatility. So I still have spinnerbaits in the boat anywhere I go. And just like I was talking about with that suet, we were talking about weed fishing earlier. When the fish are really tucked in cover, the spinnerbait is an amazing tool for making fish jump on baits. We're talking about wabagoon. This is one of my favorite baits ever on wabagoon, but really anywhere there's fish. We've caught tons of fish in Leech Lake on this thing, but the deal is, again, making contact with cover. So, of course, the spinnerbait is in line, so the hooks are always protected by this wire shaft. And when you make contact with cover in a spinnerbait, a lot of times the weed will cast it out. I'll count it down until it gets 3-4 feet into the weeds. And now you're always pointing the rod at the spinnerbait. If you're fishing a spinnerbait in cover and you're canted towards the bait and your rod is flexing and it's at an off angle and you hit cover with it and you pull up or you pull over, the bait turns, it fouls, it gets hooked on the weeds, and it's pretty much lost its effectiveness. So when you square up and you keep your rod pointed directly at the bait at a low angle, and when you get caught up on the weeds, you'll reel, you'll pull on your rod, and then again, I love it when my bait gets caught on the weeds. It's just that pop, 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 pop. You're shaking that plant, right? It's there. Give it just raise your rod a little bit of slack, and then boom, straight in line. If you pull this way, you pull up, the bait turns and you follow. If you pull the bait directly in line towards your feet, it comes through there every time, free and clear. muskies don't see these things anymore, man. It's just amazing how good these things are. And some of my biggest fish ever have come on spinner baits, and to me they just don't go out of style. This is for guys that are into the double blade thing too. You can make all kinds of modifications with these. I just put a little double blade on this one. It fishes like a little cowgirl. It's got a different vibration to it. And another thing that can really make you want to make a chattery sound, like a really like a real rumbly spinner bait. They have all pretty much got this little Colorado on the front arm of that. If you flatten that out with your pliers, make this blade completely flat, the bait will just like, it really, really comes to life, and it'll start pulsing a lot harder. So you can make little modifications to spinner baits too, that the fish you can put them in places fish don't see baits, and you can make modifications to them that really can turn fish on. All right, so I'm going to talk about one more bait here because we're getting short on time, and that is the suspending jerkbait. So, we got any smallmouth fishermen in here? Yeah, well, yeah, I'm smallmouth junkie. So, in the next couple weeks here, if things turn out right, smallmouth bass will be on fire. And where you can fish for them, it is absolutely the most amazing time of year to fish for smallmouth bass. And in my opinion, I think most people agree, what is the best bait to catch smallmouth bass in ultra cold water? Jerkbait. It's a suspending jerkbait. It's hands down, you can throw everything at smallmouth bass in cold water. And I have never seen a situation where a suspending jerkbait would be outfished by anything. It's an amazing, amazing lure, especially in cold water. They bite it all year long. And my favorite one happens to be the X-Rap, a size 10 or a size 8 X-Rap. In fact, the X-Rap, I've been crappie fishing with in the spring and had my mind blown with it. There's things in fishing that come along that they're magic. They just catch fish and they catch everything. The suspending jerkbait is one of those baits. This is a triple D. This is one of my favorites, and I've got the big X-Rap right now. These two baits have been absolutely killer for me, especially late in the year and on a lot of Canadian water, but also throughout Minnesota as well. And so think about the secret to a jerkbait working well is boom, 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 boom. And it sits. It's got to suspend, right? It just sits there, it sits there, it sits there. Smallmouth, muskies, crappies, largemouth, you name it, they'll come up, boom. The triggering characteristic is its ability to dance and stop. The colder the water, the longer that you want to let the bait sit. So now look at the back of this. I've got this little feather on here. If you fish smallmouth in the spring, you go, oh yeah, when the water's like in the 40s, probably 90% of my fish come right here. Think about that. I bet 90% of the bass I catch in the spring come on this little feather right here. They come up, they're curious, it's kind of cold, but they'll come up and they'll just grab that. I gotcha. So, I put these feathers on just about every crankbait that I've got, and I'm absolutely, totally floored on the effectiveness of this bait for cold water musky fishing. It's really bookend with jerkbaits. In the spring and in the fall, it is crazy deadly. So think about this, musky fishing in the fall. Some people are throwing crankbaits, a lot of people are throwing rubber. If you're throwing a crankbait, you're ripping it, it's going like this. Ripping it, it's going like this. You're throwing rubber, you pull it, it's falling. Baits that stop are just magical for everything, and muskies included. In clear water, you can't believe how many times this triple D, you can walk it down and it's boom, 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 boom. You'll see a muskie get hot on it, they'll stop, twitch it, pause, and you've seen them just kind of open their mouth a lot of times behind a bait. Like they're tasting it, pop, pop, and they come up, boom, and they just grab that little feather. I've got dozens of muskies on that stupid little feather on the back. If you don't believe that this catches fish, that thing is, if you're fishing jerkbaits and you don't have a feather on the back of your bait, it's 100%, I don't care what fish you're fishing for, you are missing fish in cold water. That thing is so effective to just come up and kiss that bait. So these two baits have been deadly. For the fall, this is a bait that you can get down to that 6, 8, 10-foot range, 12-foot range, a great depth to be. And you can fish the bait slow but fast. And this is what I mean by it. So you can make the bait, how you want to fish a jerk bait like this is you're snapping your rod, you're basically throwing slack back at the bait, right? So if you're not pulling the bait, see this happen with all different species of fish. If you're pulling it, the bait's not working. It's just going like this, stops. If you snap it, the bait goes, whoop, sits there, and you snap it and it goes, whoop, whoop. And so if you're snapping right, getting it line quick enough, I can make this bait go like boom, 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 boom. And it moved 4 times, but it covered this much distance horizontally between me and the fish. And if the fish are in a specific spot, they're not in a good mood, and you can make something sit and go like this in front of them, eventually they just, boom, they can't help themselves. It is crazy. So this is not musky fishing, but a few years ago I was fishing on a lake up in northern Minnesota. I was like, I really want to try this for crappie. 8 X-Rap, absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, I would bet that if we went out on cold water and that whoever was in here had their waxworms, had their crappie minnows, had their favorite crappie jigs, under a cork, probably 10 to 1. I'm not kidding. On a suspending jerkbait for crappies. So think about this. Think about if you're out crappie fishing in the spring and you throw out a bobber, and of course, it's always windy, right? It's always windy in the spring. You throw out a jig and a crappie minnow and back this bait and it's windy, your cork's sitting there doing this, sliding the bait. You might as well just be taking your jig, standing on the dock and doing this. Bait's going up and down, up and down. You think it's subtle, but you look at it underwater, it's going like this. The suspending jerkbait gets doop, doop, doop right down their face. Whoop, whoop. Try it, you should seriously try it this spring. We've done a couple pieces on it. I still can't get my head around how effective this is. So, guys aren't fishing suspending jerkbaits, absolutely do. They've got like I said, the triple D and the X-Rap 30 and 40 are 2 of my favorites, and I just saw downstairs. They now have this in like a magnum size, so I got one of those. I'm excited to try this thing. Really, really one of those magical baits for.
Do you like the feather better than just putting a grub on there?
I do. So, and this is why I think so. So, you don't want anything that's bulky. So, the more bulk there is on it, the less horizontal action that you can get out of the bait. So, like that grub has a lot of drag in the water, so it ends up making your bait go more in line. And I just time myself. It's 3 pieces of saddle hackle and just a little bit of flashing on there. So less is more. It's just a little tiny bit. I see a lot of them tied with like heavy bucktail and stuff. It kills it. So I should preface it with that. If you go put a big heavy trailer on there, your jerkbait's going to go from being crazy to a lot more in line. But just a couple pieces of saddle hackle on the back and your business. Yep.
Totally agree with you on dressing up that back hook there, so glad you addressed that. But do you put any stock into putting any UV, fluorescence, phosphorescence, any of that? And seeing any notes from the muskies with those things? Can they even see that wavelength?
The color? I don't know. I've seen colors turn on like I really like a lot of the bright color. No, I don't have anything I guess to say that one thing is better than the other, but I've seen a lot of times like one of the colors that I really like for muskies is that the bright orange. Rapple has got the hothead, is what it's called. It's that orange bait, and that thing when you see it in the water, so the smallmouth related topic, but why I think that bait is so deadly for smallmouth is when you see it, it's like glowing. It's like got this orb around it. You can see that bait, and it puts out like this crazy shadow on it. So one thing I like about that bait is I always know where it is. And so I can see it, and a lot of times you'll see a shadow or you can see something behind it. You always have a really good identifier. Even when it's relatively deep in the water, you can see where it is. So I think that helps you fish the bait better because you can make the fish bite as they're responding to it. But I kind of look at color as if the fish are dumb, they're on pressure, or I'm just looking to see what's out here, maybe get some curiosity for fish. I really like going with super bright colors, pink, chartreuse, yellow, orange. And if I feel like the fish are pressure, they're in a bad mood, I tend to go with a little more natural color. And usually have somebody you're starting in the boat, somebody's wild color and somebody's a little more natural. So, but with muskies, it seems like a lot of times the naturals can be pretty tough to beat, especially on a pressure fish. But yeah, I don't know how well I answered that.
Well, we just got into a 3-year deep last night about whether or not you can see the wavelength of UV
can, like I know carp can see all the way from ultraviolet to UV. I don't know what muskie's eyes can do, but they're definitely very colorful. Fish have really complex eyes. You can see a lot of different wavelengths that we don't see. And so that's kind of, a buddy of mine was a fishery scientist from Minnesota DNR. He was studying, he had tags in Elk Lake in Itasca State Park. He had acoustic tags in all of these fish, and he was measuring temperature, oxygen levels, and light to see where the fish were at any given point in time. It's amazing how actually light can be such a drastic portion of a fish's habitat where its eyes are optimized for feeding at certain times. Walleyes, for example, their eyes are optimized for low light, turbid water, dark water. They do far better than their prey species do in those light conditions. And I think muskies are, they seem to prefer a little bit more light, but they still live in a lot of turbid places too. So, you know, I don't know where I was going with that. But one thing I'll tell you about, this was fascinating with those fish on Elk Lake. This has to do with just everything. The ciscos, of course, were out in deep water. The most amazing thing that those muskies did is that they spent pretty much all winter, they were never more than 5 feet below the ice, wherever they were, regardless of depth. They were always really near the surface. And the day the ice went out, they all laid on the bottom for about an 18-hour period in the deepest water, like 90 feet. They never used that habitat the whole year, but as soon as that light changed, they went really, really deep and were on the bottom. And the other, it was just an interesting thing they did for a couple of days, but the other really fascinating thing was the interaction on the weed line between walleyes and muskies. So I would always presume that like evening comes in, you start getting fish on the weed line, right? The walleyes are moving into the weed line, right? Muskies are coming out of the weed line. It was the opposite. The muskies were out and the walleyes were in the weeds. So that convergence on the weed line, the fish were in different places and we were presuming that they were built the whole time, which is kind of cool. So it's a really convoluted answer to your question.
We talk about anything you want.
So anyway, yeah, I could answer more questions up here. I just have this picture of the back when everybody was scared to death that the muskies were going to eat their kids. We caught one on the foot.
If you had one tip for clear trout water during a cold front, what would it be?
Man, one tip for clear trout water during a cold front, I would say make contact with cover and fish close to the bottom. Try keeping your baits banging on structure. And I've caught nice ones up there in those conditions. I'm almost always rocks a lot of times. Or if you can find weeds, they're in weeds, but you know sometimes trout water doesn't have a lot of weeds available. But crankbaits with really steep dive curves, you can just bang, bang, bang. You know, depth raider is a really overlooked bait. I've caught a lot of fish on that. Where you just wind it down and you start just kind of walking it off the rocks. And I think it's one of those things that when fish are in a bad mood, they lay on the bottom. And that's really evident from today's technology that, you know, my boat I've got 2D sonar, DI, SI, live, 360. And when the fish are inactive, they lay on the bottom because they are not visible on any of that technology. So the only place they can be now with all of that is on the bottom. Once a fish's belly touches the bottom, it's pretty much, you really can't see them unless you're really slow with any technology. So you know, at least in a cold front, that they're on the bottom. So the idea that I've found is just try to get something down as close to them and just walk in. The depth raider happens to go to my, a jointed depth raider happens to go to my favorite.
So move out to the breaks then, you don't mess around with shallow water at all.
So it depends. Like if it was like a really gray, overcast day and a big cold front, I would be on the rocky, deeper breaks, spending my time. If it was post-frontal and it was like a warm, sunny day, like in the afternoon, I would go right up into the sand in really shallow water. Caught a lot of big fish on inside weed lines and sandy spots on those days after a big cold front, northwest wind, sunny. That's where I've had some good luck. So, yeah. Hope that helps. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you kind of follow up on his, but can you kind of speak a little bit on like midsummer muskies and thermal climate and the relation to it? And is that a major factor? Because I think there's a lot of debate to that. I've got friends that, you know, all they do is troll because they think get it down thermocline say about it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so thermocline I was talking about is the summer water stratifies. It's got two different densities. The warmer water sits on top of the colder water, and the thermocline is where that temperature gradient is most exaggerated. So muskies by nature like to be warm. So they would almost always prefer, because they can operate better, in the warmer water. So that they're very unlikely in the summertime to be below the thermocline. You should not fish for them when they're under there for a couple reasons. One, barrel trauma, which is when the fish suffer from barrel trauma. Basically, they come up, your air bladder expands, they'll have capillaries burst throughout their nervous system or their bodies, and their eyes get red. So I really don't ever suggest targeting muskies deeper than about 25 to 30 feet. Like that's really the bubble. If you're going to troll the thermocline, don't put baits down. You know, if the thermocline got down to 35 feet, 28.5 feet is an atmospheric pressure. That's how much water it takes to make up an atmosphere. So once you get over an atmosphere, you're really putting a lot of stress on the fish, and you shouldn't do it. So if I'm open water trolling a thermocline, I never put baits deeper than 12 feet, period, just because if it's 12 feet down, and those fish will come up. I've lost fish before earlier on, and so I just won't fish deep in those situations. But life relates to the thermocline, especially in lakes. Well, really in all lakes. In some places, the lake will become hypoxic, meaning there's no oxygen below that. So all the life has to be in it. In some of the Canadian shield lakes we're talking about, there's always oxygen, lots of oxygen. Anything can live down there. But you'll see where a lot of times out with electronics, you can see where the thermocline is. And if it's down 26 feet, you can pretty much bet money that any hump that tops off at 26 feet is going to be loaded with walleye. Because that's where the Cisco is. The Ciscos are right in that same depth zone. That's where the food is, and you can pretty much draw a line and know that those will be really hot spots. It has everything to do with everything in the summer. So, if that helps. I pay a ton of attention to it. And we do a lot of open water trolling. Doing this is a really cool observation I've had with the live imaging, seeing what fish do. So, anybody ever been out in the evening and all of a sudden you see Cisco start flipping on the surface? Seen that? Little Cisco's jumping up. So I always figured that it was in the evening, there's usually some bug catch going on, that the Cisco's made a little venture up, ate some bugs off the surface. Well, they're not doing that, at least in the examples I've seen with the live imaging. The fish could be at 35 feet, and you would go, oh man, look at this, 25 feet over there, there's going to be 6 Cisco's that will jump. They go, bloop, 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 and then they go right back down. So they're moving vertically, straight up and down. Crazy. I always assumed that they had come near the surface, but they were moving up and down vertically. This is mind-blowing to me in fishing. So we've been trolling, but we catch some fish out there trolling. Change, using the live imaging, you could cast, both trolling and casting, you cast, and you're like, oh man, there's almost always 2 or 3 muskies when we run into them, and this is happening, they'd be together. And you cast to them, boom, your bait hits the water, you see one engage on the live imaging, oh here he comes, and you just watch the fish just disappear from your bait, lose interest. Started dropping the bait. Oh, here comes one. Just boom, let go of the line, the bait goes, bang. Let's think about it, the fish are looking, the muskies are looking for things that are going like this, not things that are going like this. Duh, like it was just like, duh, it was so amazing on how those fish behaved up there. And that live imaging, it shows you all kinds of really cool stuff.
Even on electronics, like in the wintertime, ice fishing, same thing, you're digging for anything, crappies or walleyes, whatever, straight up.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And they don't come from 19 feet over, and they'll be there. So you can see them from straight.
It's really, and you see how they orient their bodies now too. It is really fascinating. Super cool stuff. So, yeah. Well, anything else you guys have? I'm just here today to BS. So, come on in, say hey, do whatever. So come on up. So, right on. Thank you guys for listening to that.